All right, well, let's dive right back into Proverbs and the introduction to that, an introduction really to wisdom literature as a whole. Um, Proverbs is obviously, again, the most well known, or the book most identified with wisdom literature. So we want to begin there and talk about Proverbs. Later on, we'll discuss a little bit the other wisdom books, Ecclesiastes and uh, Song of Solomon, Job. But our focus is mainly going to be on Proverbs because your passage, your second sermon, will be from Proverbs. And so I wanted to give some attention to that. All right, so this will be the third discussion, third part introduction on this book. And again, just have the picture of the man making the chair, just as a reminder of the word wisdom. The idea behind wisdom is that it's a skill. Here, this man has a skill or wisdom in constructing and making furniture. In the morally speaking, wisdom is, in the moral realm, this idea of the ability or the skill to be able to apply biblical truth to the everyday events of life. And it's that skill in living, understanding what the right path is to follow, and then taking that path. That's the idea of wisdom. Now, Proverbs, if you remember last time, we looked at the first several verses of the book of Proverbs because those verses actually give us the background context to the book. So it provides a lot of helpful information, you're going to need for your Proverbs assignment, the first one from Proverbs. And so what I'd like to do is we'll start. I'm going to ask Sid if you could read verses 1 to 7 here from Proverbs chapter 1. We'll just get started looking at the background context.
Proverbs chapter 1, 1 to 7. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding, to receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the naive, to the youth knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. To understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction.
All right, very good. So notice here, last time we talked about this, Solomon here, the author identifies himself here. We learned that Proverbs was written primarily by Solomon to the naive, the wise, and particularly to his sons. So the author is primarily Solomon. Again, chapters 30 and 31 identify two other authors, but it's still under the general idea of Solomon as the chief author. And it's written, the book of Proverbs was written specifically to those who are described as the naive in verse 4, to those who are described as the wise in verse 5, and particularly to his sons, which are mentioned almost 30 times in the book. He makes reference to his sons. And remember too, from last week, we talked about who can tell me, let's just remind ourselves, the naive, the wise, and the fool. All right, who can tell me what the wise person is in Proverbs? Who is the wise person, the wise man? Anybody want to? Alan?
Those who hear, those who will hear.
Yeah, in fact, he says that here, doesn't he? A wise man will hear and increase in learning. So a wise man is the one who wants to receive instruction and follow it. Okay, that's the wise man. Who is the naive person? Anybody remember?
Simple-minded.
Yeah, simple-minded. That's a good way to describe. So the wise is the one who listens to instruction and follows it. The naive is simple-minded, doesn't yet know the right path. We could say ignorant, kind of like a child. Now, those two are addressed, but there's a third person mentioned often in the book of Proverbs and even mentioned here, the fool. Right? And the fool, what is the fool? Or who is the fool? Anybody? It even says here in verse 7, it describes him, right? The fool is the one who's opposite of the wise, isn't he? Pastor Noor, who's the fool?
Despise wisdom and instruction.
The one who despises instruction. And if you remember from like even a little bit later in Proverbs 1, I think it's verse 22 in the same chapter, it says, let me see. Fools hate knowledge, it says in Proverbs 1:22. So they hate knowledge, they despise instruction, and even Psalm 14:1 says that they are, the fool said in his heart, there is no God. Okay, they are rebels against God. So what's interesting, notice in here in this introduction to Proverbs, that the fool is not one of those being written to. Now you would think normally, right, if there's somebody who's rebellious, that, you know, this book should be addressed to them, right? To say, hey, knock it off. You need to follow the right path. But notice this book isn't addressed to fools because they don't want to listen. They don't care. They've made their choice. All right. Now, a wise person, he will listen to instruction. A naive person might listen to instruction. So you hope that they do, but a fool will not. And so Solomon doesn't waste his time. All right. Now, he does speak often of a fool because he will contrast the wise versus the fool, but he doesn't address the fool here. So keep that in mind. This book is written primarily by Solomon to the naive, the wise, and again, particularly to his sons. Okay. So that gives us an idea of the author and the audience. And also, we'll talk about in a little bit the, I think, did we talk about, last time, the purpose, remember, is given in several of these two statements: to discern, to receive instruction, to give prudence, to give knowledge and discretion, to understand. Okay, so again, the intent of the book of Proverbs is instructional. It's to tell the wise, to tell the naive, to tell the young, hey, this is the path you want to follow. You want to take this course of action in your life in these particular areas. This is the path over here you don't want to follow. All right, so it's to give discernment. It's to help the wise and the naive choose the right path. All right, so that's the general purpose of this book. Okay, and we discussed that last time. And then there was we left off talking about some of the key interpretive principles when it comes to wisdom literature. All right, and when we look at the book of Proverbs, we remember that it's a collection of wisdom literature, both wisdom poems. Remember, that's the extended treatment of a particular topic, a full poem, and then the aphorisms, which are those short 1 or 2 verse statements on a particular topic. And so Proverbs is a collection of both of those that provides instruction to the reader, again, on how to apply God's wisdom, God's principles, God's truth to everyday situations in life. Okay, Now, to correctly understand wisdom literature and the book of Proverbs in particular, there's a few principles that we need to remember or keep in mind. And this is where we left off last week, where we said, remember, wisdom literature is not promises. That is, it's not this idea of if you do this, then it's a guarantee that this will be the result. That if you take this course of action, that you will be guaranteed of this outcome. All right. Instead, we have to remember wisdom literature says this, that generally speaking, if you take this course of action, then this will usually happen. Okay. So, for example, here's a couple of them. Let's see. Kazot, why don't you take the first one here? Proverbs 15:1. Can you read that for us?
Proverbs chapter 15, verse 1. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger.
Okay, so keeping this in mind, this is a truism. This is not telling us that this what is said here will happen all the time, every time. But it's saying normally, if you speak with a gentle response, someone who is angry will calm down. Usually, but not always. Or conversely, if you bring a harsh word, usually that will cause another person or tempt another person to anger. Again, that's usually what will happen, but not always. And so this is instructional because it's telling us, hey, we need to respond to people with gentleness, not harshness. Okay, so that is an instruction we need to follow. And what Solomon is saying here is that if you do that, generally a gentle response will help to calm a situation, but a harsh response will heat it up. Okay, but he's not saying that always happens. He's just saying that usually happens. Okay, but still we're called to follow this course of action. Okay, so we might say they're not guarantees, they're guides. Maybe that's a good way to, not guarantees, but guides as to what will, again, the keyword is usually or normally happen. Okay, another example. Bridio, I'll have you read this one. Proverbs 21, verse 13. Can you read that?
Proverbs 21, verse 13. He who shuts his ear to the cry of the poor will also cry himself and not be answered.
Okay, here's another example of a truism. Usually speaking, the person who ignores the poor and doesn't help them will not find help when he needs it. Now, that's not the case all the time, right? I know several people who ignore the poor or even hate the poor and avoid helping them that are very successful. All right. So this is not saying that all the time this will happen, but this is a general principle. So the instruction is don't turn away from the cries of the poor. Help them. All right. And usually then you will find help when you need it. But the instruction remains that we should follow the principle being given in the passage, and then the outcome will usually be as is described here. Again, not a guarantee, but a guide. All right. Any questions on that? Again, I know we did talk about that last time, but I came up with a couple other examples just to remind us. And I think even Noor brought up a few weeks ago, just, the passage, to train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. Again, when we understand that that's a truism that that's generally the case, not always the case, but generally, that helps us so that we realize, oh, this isn't a promise or a guarantee, it's a guide. And I think a lot of people approach the Proverbs, they don't understand that. And so they believe, well, all these verses are guarantees. But they're not. They're truisms. They're general principles that how the world works, how God has designed his world. Okay? And we can turn to like the book of Job again as an example where it doesn't always work that way. That God at times allows for something else to happen in order for his purposes. Okay? Now that's different than an epistle or sermon, right? Where, says that, the wages of sin is death in Romans. That's not a truism. That's an absolute fact. Okay? Because that's not a wisdom literature. Romans is an epistle. It's stating truth directly, and it's indicating if, the wages of sin is death. That's just true always. It's not a truism. Okay? That's the difference. Or, right? All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That's a direct truth statement. It's not saying usually that's true or that's normally the case. No, that is a direct, we would call it a propositional statement. Okay? So Proverbs is a little more difficult because there are propositional statements in Proverbs, like when you're talking about the character of God, for example. So there are direct statements like that in Proverbs, but when it comes to these Proverbs that state a given, if you do this action, this will be the outcome, those we understand as a guide, not a guarantee as far as the outcome. Okay? Am I making sense? Do you have any questions about that? So, for example, let's just look at a few more verses. This is Proverbs, let's see. Proverbs chapter 11. A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. Now, this is a truth statement, right? This is describing something as it relates to God. So this is not a usually the case passage. This is a direct statement. God hates false balances, always. Okay? When pride comes, then comes dishonor, but with the humble is wisdom. Now, here's a case where people who are proud, sometimes, usually, there will be dishonor, but sometimes there isn't. Okay? Still, the instruction is don't be proud, be humble. But this is giving us a truism. Okay? So you just have to recognize the difference. Sometimes there'll be a statement in Proverbs that is a direct true statement, a proposition, meaning it's true all the time. And then you'll have several passages which are truisms. That is, when it comes to certain outcomes of a given action, those outcomes are generally true, but not guarantees. Questions on that? You see the difference? Maybe what can help you or help us when you're looking at these passages is bringing in other scriptures as well, knowing basically verse 1 is a truth statement. It's a proposition because we know this about the Lord from other passages, that he is just, that he hates injustice. And so that's true all the time. No exceptions. And this isn't an action that has a result. This is making a statement about God. All right. Whereas verse 2, there's an action that leads to a result. And sometimes that result happens. Usually that result happens, but not always. That's the idea. Okay. Anyone have any comments or questions before we look at another principle? I know I'm being repetitive, but this is kind of a key hermeneutic that we need to make sure we understand when we look at Proverbs. Okay. Okay. So that's one hermeneutical principle, is that wisdom literature is not promises, it's truisms. Another is this: wisdom literature is not intended to give us formulas for success. That is, the book of Proverbs was not given as a manual so that you could be wealthy and happy and successful and have a good life. A lot of people treat the book of Proverbs that way, as if it's, this is a book for believers, for unbelievers, for people from any religion, because it's just a general book about how to have a good life. That if you follow these principles and do this and this and this, then you'll have all these good things. If you're diligent, you'll be wealthy. If you listen to the poor, then people will listen to you and help you. If you use these communication skills, then you will have good communication. If if you have this character quality, then you'll have this blessing. So people treat it like a formula for success, like this manual for how to have a good life. That is not what God intended Proverbs to be for. All right. I've seen a lot of books that are like these, especially like with money, how to, principles from Proverbs on how to handle your money. Now, certainly there's a lot of great instruction in Proverbs on money. There's a lot of great instruction in Proverbs on communication, on how to deal with anger, on how to deal with a wayward child. There's a lot of good instruction in Proverbs, but we must be careful we don't treat it like this manual that just tells us how to live life. Okay, that is so I'm going to come back to this. That is a fatal flaw for many who come to Proverbs. They just see it as sort of this like a self-help book on how to be successful, that doesn't matter if you're Christian or not, these principles will apply and you can use them and you'll be blessed and life will be great. That's not what they're for. The purpose is to provide the wisdom of God to life so that the hearers would know how God would want them to live in light of fearing him. That is a key statement. That is the key statement. All right. We have to understand this. In fact, this is where I want to spend a little time on this. Okay. Remember, in that last verse that Sid read earlier in the introduction to the book, it said the fear of the Lord. In fact, let me just go back up to it. Right. So we read all of these introductory statements. Verses 1 to 6 tells us who wrote Proverbs, to whom Proverbs was written, the purpose for the Proverbs, right? That's verses 1 to 6. And then notice the very next statement after those basic background information is given. Solomon says this: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. That's the key statement of the book. If you don't get verse 7, you don't get Proverbs. Everything given in the book of Proverbs is in light of verse 7. It's really the summary statement. It's the first thing that, as he begins to give instruction in the book, this is the first thing he says. Beginning is the idea of foundation, most important, chief. I think it's literally Let me look it up. I think it's literally the word for chief. Proverbs 1:7. Fear of Yahweh is, is this idea of beginning, chief, what is first, at the head. Okay, it's this idea. So what's he saying here? The fear of the Lord is the chief, the foundation, the most important. It's the foundation to knowledge, the foundation to wisdom. It begins, it starts, the head of it is this concept of the fear of the Lord. All right, and this principle is the key interpretive principle for the whole book. This is what sets the book of Proverbs apart as a Christian book. This isn't a general book just for everybody to learn how to live life and have a good life. If you miss this statement, you missed the foundation to wisdom literature. All right. This is a common error in interpreting Proverbs. Because this tells us Proverbs is more than just knowing what to do and what not to do. Proverbs is more than just knowing what will happen if you do this or what will happen if you do that. Proverbs is much more than that. Okay? Proverbs carries the idea of everything is built upon this foundation, the fear of the Lord. That's where wisdom begins. That's the foundation to knowledge, at least the knowledge that's going to be described in this book. In fact, this phrase, the fear of the Lord, is used 18 times, if I counted right, in the book of Proverbs. Let's look at a couple of other verses here together. All right. We'll start, Alan, I'll have you read the next one here. Proverbs 9, verse 10.
Proverbs 9, verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding.
All right. And go ahead and read the next one too. Job, this is Job, another wisdom book, 28:28.
And to man he said, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding.
So there, notice it, in Job, the statement given basically summarizes wisdom in that statement, the fear of the Lord. That is wisdom. So again, it's emphasizing the priority or the foundational nature of this. All right, Alan, you're doing a good job. Just keep going. Can you do the next one?
Psalm 111, verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. A good understanding have all those who do his commandments. His praise endures forever.
Okay, so here in Psalm 111, a wisdom psalm, it gives the same statement. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And I'm going to guess that it's the same word here. Yep, it's the same word. That idea of chief, foremost, most important, at the head. All right, same idea. Finally, Alan, can you read Ecclesiastes? This is the last verse in Ecclesiastes.
Ecclesiastes 12:13. The conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person.
All right, and this is a critical statement in Ecclesiastes, because if you remember that book, he talks about all of these different things in life that he's tried, and how, basically what's the repeated statement, vanity of vanities, all is vanity, life is a vapor, life is meaningless, and he described all of these situations. And at the very end, he says, well, here's the conclusion. Fear God and keep his commandments. That's all that matters. So again, that summary statement. And so brothers, this is just to show these are all statements that are made in wisdom literature and other books in addition to the Proverbs. And you can't move forward, and I would say this, in interpreting wisdom passages until you get this first. You can't move forward in applying these wisdom passages until you get this first. I mean, think of it like, all right, let me ask Alex. Alex, what is your, if you could have any car in the world, and money's no object, what kind of car would you want?
Lamborghini.
Yes, Lamborghini. Good choice. Okay, so let's say Pastor Noor, he got this gift from heaven, $1 million. So he decides he loves brother Alex so much, he's going to buy him a Lamborghini. So he gives you this Lamborghini, and you come out and you look, this car is beautiful, right? Has all the color you want, all the features you want. You think about how great this is going to be to drive. Don't worry about the gasoline. Pastor Noor gave you lots of money for gas too, okay? But if you don't have the keys to the car or the fob to the car, then the car is not gonna, it's useless for you, right? You can't drive it anywhere. It looks beautiful, it looks great, you're very excited, but you can't use it because you don't have the key to start it. That is the fear of the Lord when it comes to the Proverbs or wisdom literature. That is the key. There's all these great principles in Proverbs of how to live life and how to experience the blessing of God. But if you don't understand how the fear of the Lord ties into that, then you don't have the key to understand how to interpret the Proverbs or to apply them. So if you want to enjoy the benefits of that Lamborghini, you have to, obviously be able to start the car. And you need the key to do that, or the fob to do that. And it's the same with Proverbs. It's the exact same issue of Proverbs. The fear of the Lord is where wisdom begins. The fear of the Lord is the foundation of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is what all the principles given in the book of Proverbs rest upon. If you take that out, then the book of Proverbs is no benefit ultimately to you. Okay? We're going to come back to this, especially when we talk about preaching Proverbs, because a lot of guys preach Proverbs really in a law-based manner. As a, do this and these good things will come. Do that and there'll be these consequences. And so they just treat it as a do or don't book. And that really misses the whole point of it. Like I said, Proverbs is a Christian book in a lot of ways. Yeah, it's an Old Testament book. I understand that. But in the sense of it rests upon a relationship with God. That is the key. Okay? So how do I get that from the fear of the Lord? Well, what does this phrase, the fear of the Lord, mean? I think that word fear sometimes has in our minds, terror, right? I'm scared. And certainly there's that element. But if you think about it, there's two different kinds of fear. There's the fear that's of terror, and then there's another kind of fear, and that's the kind that I want to focus attention on. So here, let me have Pastor Arn. Brother Arn, can you read, this is Deuteronomy 10, a few verses out of Deuteronomy 10.
Thank you, Pastor. Verse 12. Now, Israel, what does the Lord your God requires from you, but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways and love him, and to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the Lord's commandments and his statutes, which I am commanding you today for your good. You shall fear the Lord your God, you shall serve him and cling to him, and you shall swear by his name. He is your praise, and he is your God, who has done these great things and awesome things for you, which your eyes have seen.
Okay. Now, there are several passages, especially in Deuteronomy, that talk about this, but this is just one. Notice here, verse 12, what does Yahweh require from you? To fear him. What does that mean? God wants us to be scared? Well, notice what he said. He doesn't say that here. He doesn't say to fear the Lord your God, to be scared. Notice what it says. 1, to walk in his ways. 2, to love him. You guys see that? 3, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. This passionate desire with all your being, your emotions, your attitudes, your thoughts, to serve him and to keep the Lord's commandments, to do what he says. And then here, verse 20, he repeats again, you shall fear the Lord your God. Okay, what does that mean? You shall serve him and cling to him. Does that sound like terror? You don't cling to something you're terrified of, right? You run from it, right? If there's a huge dog that's got his teeth bared and he's ready to attack you, you don't run up and hug him, right? You run. At least I would, right?
Yes.
Sorry, question?
Wait a minute.
Oh. And then swear by his name. That's this idea of loyalty, allegiance. So the picture, and then notice it says, he is your praise. He is your God who has done these great and awesome things for you. So notice the tone here, right? It's not one of terror or to be afraid. It's this idea of clinging to God, of loving him, of serving him, being loyal to him, following him, obeying him.
You can call this, Pastor, submissive fear or reverential fear.
Sorry, Tazot, say that again.
Submissive fear or reverential fear. You can call this one.
Yeah, there's actually, those are good ways to express it. Let me read to you what Charles Bridges said. I think of all the ones I've heard, definitions I've heard, I like this one the most. He described the fear of the Lord like this. The fear of the Lord is that affectionate reverence by which the child of God bends himself humbly and carefully to his Father's law. I really like that expression, affectionate reverence. Because, yeah, as you said, because you know, there's a submissive, a reverence, an awe, but it's not terror. It's a relationship. It's a relational thing. It's to love him, to depend on him, to trust him, to recognize he deserves my full allegiance and obedience and service. So that's the key. I like how he puts it, an affectionate reverence. That's really good. That's really good. It's kind of, you can think of it this way, brothers. If, let's say a man with a gun walks into your house and demands money, right? This has happened to me, by the way. I've had a guy with a gun push me in a house and tell me, give me money, give him money. So if a guy with a gun is pointing it at you and says, give me money, will you obey him? I did. I said, you can have everything I have, right? Why? I feared him, didn't I? Because of what he could do to me. He could shoot me. So that was one type of fear, okay, or respect. It's a respect out of terror. I didn't want to die. So I did what he said. Now let's say your father walks into the room and he said, son, do you have some money that I could have or borrow? Now in that case, I would give my father money if he asked me for it. Not because I was afraid of him, but out of love and respect for him. You see the difference? In both cases, I would give the money. But in one case, it's out of terror. In the other case, it's out of affectionate reverence. Now that's my father. Obviously, with the Lord, it's a much greater affectionate reverence that we should have. But you get the idea, right? And that's when you see the fear of the Lord, and especially in the Old Testament, it could be either one of those. If it's a non-believer, the fear of the Lord will this be this idea of terror, right? That, because God is terrifying. What does it say in Hebrews? It is a terrifying thing to fall into the hands of the living God. So there is that fear of the Lord that is absolute terror. But that's not what, for his children, it's not that way. All right, if we were to run from God in terror as his child, what would that say about God? Right? People would say, wow, I don't want to know that God. If the people that he says he loves are, scared of him like that. No, it's this idea of an affectionate reverence as described in Deuteronomy 10 and other. We could look at a lot of other passages. It talks about joy, praise, reverence, respect, loyalty, love, service. All of those terms are used in connection with the fear of the Lord for his children. Okay? So when Proverbs is using this idea of the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, what it's saying is that wisdom begins with a relationship with God. Wisdom begins with this affectionate reverence for him. That you cannot separate these wisdom principles from that. The fear of the Lord, what does it say, is the beginning of wisdom or the beginning of knowledge. The chief part, the most important, the start, the foundation. And that idea is the affectionate reverence for the Lord. So it's speaking of relationship with God. Thoughts, questions, comments? Michael, does that make sense? You have any thoughts about that?
And so far, Pastor Tim, very clear. Thank you.
Okay, good. Anybody else? I think this concept of the fear of the Lord, it not only is important, when we talk about wisdom literature and but even just in understanding the term as it's used in the Bible, that there is, it incorporates this idea of awe, of reverence, of deep respect, but it's connected to a relationship. Like I said, if my father asks for something, I would do it out of respect for him, but also because he's my dad and I love him. So it's that idea of an affectionate reverence or respect for him. That's what would motivate me to respond. And that's the idea with Proverbs, that we are to follow these paths or these instructions that are given because we have this affectionate reverence for God. If we don't have that, then doing whatever that Proverbs passage says really doesn't matter. It's vain. That's the point of Ecclesiastes. You can take all of these paths in life. This one, that one, this one, that one. All of it's meaningless and senseless if you don't have a fear for God. That's how he ends the book. And again, that fear for God, meaning the affectionate reverence that indicates a relationship. All right? Nor did you have something you were going to say? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it is out of context, but it somehow is bothering me. In 2 Corinthians, when he said, don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers, I see that they take it very lightly. It is kind of a suggestion, take it or leave it. So it does fall in the same category of the Proverbs.
In what way? I guess I'm not following your question.
And the 2 Corinthians, when it's kind of, it's a counsel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then they don't say the it is sin that you do that way. It's just anyway. They just I have many troubles with the believers, married unbelievers. So that is the same story. Here comes trouble.
Do you mean, are you talking about that doesn't seem to show an affectionate reverence if you disobey this passage? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, like, we could say it for a lot of things, right? That if we are consistently disobedient and rebellious maybe in a particular area, then it really would bring up the question, does that person really have an affectionate reverence for the Lord? Is that person really a believer? Right? Now, certainly there are times we sin, and we may have periods of time that we sin. But that's not reflecting this heart of affectionate reverence. So yeah, if we make a decision to be bound with an unbeliever, and by the way, this isn't just marriage. Okay, this is to be interconnected with an unbeliever, and this, you can do this in a lot of ways. Marriage being obviously one very important way that you can be bound with somebody else. But yeah, for a person to take that course, despite what God's word says, really does make us ask a question. Does that person truly have an affectionate reverence for the Lord? That's why 1 John is such a helpful book, right? It talks about what are the characteristics of a person who is genuinely saved, right? He says, I write these things to you who believe in the name of the Son of God, so that you may know that you have eternal life. And as you go through the book, it really is just describing what affectionate reverence for God looks like. And then even he includes this idea of loving God and loving others too, right? Which, by the way, Jesus said was the greatest commandment. To love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. I would offer that that's just another expression. Christ is essentially saying you will fear the Lord. And that's how he's describing it. And what does that fear look like? It is to love him with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. So, yeah, this is a troubling text for those who reject its instruction. And it's like that, for guys people that are, choosing to divorce or something. I remember being in many conversations with men who were choosing to divorce their spouse despite all of the instruction in Scripture and all of the exhortation. They didn't want to obey the Lord. And so, yeah, many times I say, man, I don't even know where you're at with God. Are you even a Christian? Because you're sure not acting like it right now. So, yeah, for a believer, really what characterizes a believer is a person that has an affectionate reverence for Christ. Now, that's something that the Lord puts in our heart, right? We don't generate that love ourselves. We're dead in our trespasses and sins, but that's a mark of a Christian. There's a book, really helpful book. It's called, here, I'll type it on the chat. It's called the Distinguishing Traits of Christian Character by Gardner Spring. And this book is, I'll put it here as well. This is a really helpful book, and it's describing sort of what does a Christian look like. And what I like about the book is the first part of the book, he describes characteristics of people that could be Christian, but aren't necessarily. Like guilt for sin. Certainly a believer would experience guilt for sin, but even an unbeliever can experience guilt for sin. So that's a necessary character of a Christian, but it's not sufficient to say that person definitely is a Christian. So he has several of these character qualities that would be a person would definitely be a person who's a Christian would have them, but a non-believer could have them too. And then the second part of the book, he describes, here are those characteristics that only a believer would have. And the first one he mentions is love for God, a genuine love for God. So this is a helpful book that you can get. I might even be able to post a copy of it because it was out of print for a while. But it's a very small book, very, very challenging book. Highly recommended. Distinguishing Traits of Christian Character. Anyway, we are...
Thank you, Pastor Tim. Thank you.
No, that's a good question. Any other questions before we keep going? Like I said, this is the foundational interpretive principle of the book of Proverbs. It's the foundational preaching principle for the book of Proverbs. When you teach out of Proverbs, do not forget, and this should be the case anyway for any sermon we give. It must be gospel-centered, right? It must be Christ-centered. Well, that doesn't change when you preach out of Proverbs. But I've seen a tendency of guys that do. They just start focusing on the, do this or don't do that if you want to, and then you'll get this blessing or that reward or whatever. And they don't bring the gospel. And so Solomon is reminding us here, the very first statement he makes after he introduces the book, he says this, look, everything I'm about to tell you about wisdom, it has to be based upon an affectionate reverence for God. That's where it starts. All right, so whenever you preach on that, keep that in mind. All right, and let me just continue here. Notice that the book of Proverbs gives this principle deductively. That is, it states it right at the beginning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And then the rest of the book is how he shows it. Now, Ecclesiastes actually comes at it from the other direction. Ecclesiastes gives all of these examples of the futility of life and then concludes with the statement, fear of the Lord. So the conclusion is this, to fear God and keep his commandments. So in Ecclesiastes, you got to be careful. If you preach through it or teach through it, you better recognize the end point. Otherwise, if you if you don't, you can end up with some errors as you teach it. Because there's like some places in Ecclesiastes that talks about the futility of wisdom. Right? Let me see if I can find one. Let's see. Yeah, in fact, here it is. Okay. Ecclesiastes in the first chapter. Let me share this. This is this is not in the text. It's just but it's the title given by the translator, The Futility of Wisdom. Notice he says, I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that have been done in heaven. I've seen all the works which have been done under the sun. And notice verse 16, I said to myself, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all those who were before me. My mind has observed a wealth of wisdom, and I set my mind to know wisdom. And then notice he says, in much, but I realized this was striving after wind, because in much wisdom there is grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. Wait a minute, Solomon. What are you saying? Are you saying pursuing wisdom is useless? Are you saying wisdom is of no benefit, that it's striving after wind? So here's a good example. If you stopped here and just taught this and said, well, this is what Solomon is saying, and he knew what he's talking about. He was the wisest man who ever lived. And he basically said, pursuing wisdom is madness. It's striving after wind. It's pointless. Well, that would contradict a lot of other passages, wouldn't it? So we have to remember, he's building a case here. Wisdom apart from the fear of the Lord is striving after wind. All right, now he doesn't say that yet. He brings that in at the very end of the book, because what he's trying to do is set up the reader. All right, he's setting up the reader, telling him all this stuff about, pursuing pleasures and wealth and alcohol and wisdom and riches, and he goes through the whole book just talking about, the vanity of all these things, even wisdom itself. And we could end up with some very wrong thinking if we don't understand that he's basically doing an inductive message here. He's leading us to a point, and he doesn't give that point right away. In fact, at the beginning of the book, what does he say? The first part of the book, he mentions himself as the author, and then he says, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Everything's meaningless. Everything's like vapor. It's like, well, that's the beginning. That's how it starts, but then how does it end? Well, Pastor Allen read us the ending here. The conclusion is this. So he said, look, after all I've said, here's the concluding thought. Fear God and keep his commandments. That's it. All right. So that is the important thing to understand here. Now, there's another side to this coin, right? Remember, Proverbs 1:7, what did it say? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And then notice it right next to it in the parallel statement, right? The fear of the Lord is the beginning, I think, of knowledge, it says. And then what's the parallel? The next statement, fools despise wisdom and instruction. Why is that? Well, he answered it in the first line. They do not have the fear of the Lord. In fact, it's just the opposite. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. Not only do they reject a relationship with God, they reject God. And that's why when you're reading the Proverbs and you see, when it mentions a fool, don't think of someone who's just stupid or doesn't know what he's doing, or we have the term the village idiot, the person that's just stupid. They don't. The fool is actually the one who rejects God and who hates his instruction. The opposite of the one who has an affectionate reverence. So here's the thing to think about. The wise person is not just the one who follows the path of wisdom. The wise person is the one who follows the path of wisdom because he has an affectionate reverence for God. You cannot be a wise person and reject God. The path of wisdom is not defined by your actions first. It's defined by your heart first that leads to these actions. Okay, we know that as Christians, right? Believers, as pastors. But sometimes it seems like when people approach the book of Proverbs, they sort of lose sight of all that and they just focus on this is what to do, this is what not to do, this is what to think, this is what not to think. You want to have this outcome, then do this. If you want to avoid this outcome, then do that, or don't do that. But that misses the whole point, I believe. That the wise man is the one who has an affectionate reverence for God, and that is what then produces this desire to follow God's path. All right. So you are not living a life of wisdom if you reject God. They don't go together. Okay. Well, that's my point. And I believe that's Solomon's point. That's why he says, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Say, look, before you start reading my book or reading my Proverbs or reading any of this, you need to have an affectionate reverence for God. All right? Because fools, they despise wisdom and instruction. Why? Because they hate God. They reject God. All right? So whenever you're preaching out of Proverbs and interpreting Proverbs, you got to bring that up. When you talk about the fool and the wise, you're saying, look, it's not just about do this or don't do that. It's like, what does your heart desire? If you desire the way of the fool, what does that tell you about where your heart's at? Not just that you'll have this consequence if you follow the path of the fool, but that why would you even want to? That's revealing something about your heart. Okay? Any thoughts or questions about that?
So Tim,
Yeah, Alan.
that's why it's very important to, I don't know how I should say this, but I think there are universal rules that must be given as we approach the different genres in the Bible. Because, for example, we have been talking about the fear of the Lord, and you showed us what Solomon said in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, the vanity of wisdom. And it seems to contradict all those instructions about the benefits of wisdom. But what I'm realizing is Solomon is actually pointing us to the very foundations of the blessed life, a truly blessed life, and it's the fear of the Lord. So for me, today, it's so common, even among Christians, to pursue the practical benefits of wise instructions. But we are really tested when those practical benefits are not seen, are not experienced, or when uh, uh, after pursuing those instructions and not seeing the positive results that they are promising, it's like there lies the test whether the person truly loves God or not, something like that.
Yeah.
So I think you mentioned also about what are the characteristics of a genuine Christian, because I think nowadays the problem is there's a lot of confusion about what is it to truly follow the Lord, what it is to truly maintain a good Christian life, because of the confusions being brought by all these Christians living in different ways. And many are following the practical benefits of Christianity. So it's really difficult to pursue righteousness, especially when the yield is not immediate.
Yeah.
The rewards of it are not immediate. So I think that's why the fear of the Lord is very important, because it keeps the person focusing on the Lord and enabling the person to live the Christian life, even though there are no practical results. And
Yeah, that's a good point.
what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because if we just sort of treat Proverbs like, the book of do's and don'ts, that, that's our tendency, right? As Christian or non-Christian, is to be legalistic, isn't it? Like, okay, I just got to follow these rules, and that's what's most important. When it's certainly obeying God is important, but we must obey him out of an affectionate reverence, out of a relationship, right? Out of, by God's grace. Proverbs is very grace-based, actually, because it sees the foundation of all of it as a relationship with the Lord. So, but people, like in the Christian life, can tend to, they tend to just try to keep rules, or they go the other way, kind of what you're talking about, Alan, where they don't keep the rules, but then they say, well, God forgives me anyway, and so it's okay. And so, but either way, that's not good either. And I think Proverbs exposes that, because if you find yourself following the path of the fool more often than the path of the wise, that might indicate you don't have the fear of the Lord as the foundation. And so you're following the path of what your heart really desires. Whereas the wise man will follow this path because he has this affectionate reverence with the Lord. Or we might say it in Christian terms, a person obeys Christ out of love for Christ. Right? What did Jesus say in John 14? If you love me, you'll keep my commandments. That's basically the same thing that Solomon's saying. I mean, he's not mentioning Christ there specifically, but just the idea of obedience comes from a heart that loves God, has a relationship with God. Jesus is saying the same thing. So, very important. Let me, in the time we have left, I want to cover just one more aspect to finish up sort of this introduction to Proverbs. Okay, let me see. So how do we obtain wisdom then? All right, well, the foundation again is fear of the Lord. But just in a practical sense then. Okay, let's say, you know, I do have the fear of the Lord. I have affectionate reverence for him. I want to know the right thing to do. I want to follow the path of wisdom. How do I gain this wisdom? All right, well, you know, if someone were to come up to you, you know, someone in your congregation, your church, and they say, Pastor, Lord, I need wisdom. You know, I have this decision I need to make. I'm not sure what to do. And then we automatically go to, well, James 1:5, right? Says, if any of you lacks wisdom, then let him ask of God, who gives to all generously without reproach, and it will be given to him. All right. So there we say, okay, so just pray for God to give you wisdom. And James 1:5 says he will give you wisdom. Okay, now that it is true, we must pray for wisdom, but is that all the Bible says when it comes to acquiring wisdom? That all we need to do is just ask, just pray. That's it. That's what James says. Well, a couple things. One, what does James later say in chapter 1? He talks about the importance of hearing the word, doesn't he? Be slow to speak, quick to hear. And he talks about prove yourselves to be doers of the word, not just hearers. All right. So was James saying that prayer and only prayer is all that is needed to gain wisdom? Well, you got to read the whole chapter. Solomon gives it explicitly in Proverbs 2. How do we gain wisdom? Michael, I'm going to ask you to read this. Proverbs 2, verses 1 through 6 here. Can you read that?
Yes, Pastor Steve.
Thank you.
My son, if you will receive my words and treasure my commandments within you, make your ear attentive to wisdom, incline your heart to understanding, for if you cry for discernment, lift your voice for understanding. There's the ask part from James 1:5.
Yeah.
If you seek here as silver and search for her as for hidden treasures, then you will discern the fear of the Lord and discover the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding.
Sorry, I meant to take this part, highlighted part out first, but since it's in there. But notice Solomon, he does follow what James says, right? If you will receive my commandments, treasure my words, make your ear attentive to wisdom. Then he says this, cry for discernment, lift your voice for understanding. So there's the ask, right? Pray, ask God for it. But notice Solomon also says, if you seek her and search for her. So there's two parts here. There is the ask, pray, and there's the seek, search. Both of those. And then notice in verse 5, Solomon says, then you will discern the fear of the Lord and discover the knowledge of God, for the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. But notice Solomon identifies two parts here. James does also, but he doesn't come to the second part till later in chapter 1. Here Solomon puts it all together. So Solomon says, do you want to obtain wisdom? Cry out for it, ask for it, and seek it. How do we seek wisdom? Tell me, guys, how do we seek it? How do we search for it? Where do we search for it?
The scripture.
Yeah.
In his word.
In his word. That's an easy one, right? In his word. Okay. So Solomon did not just say cry out for it. He also said seek it. And I would contend James did the same thing. He says to pray, and then later in chapter 1, he talks about the importance of heeding the word and applying the word. That's the way we obtain wisdom and understanding. All right. Only God can give it. We need to cry out to him for it, but we also need to seek it. Proverbs 8:17. I love, this is wisdom speaking. It's kind of a personification of wisdom. I love those who love me, and those who diligently seek me, there's that word again, seek me, will find me. There you go. So how do we obtain wisdom? Well, this brings us back to the purpose of Proverbs. If it was just asking for wisdom and that was it, there would be no need for the book of Proverbs. Really, right? It's like, well, if you need wisdom, just ask, just pray. That's it. But we have the book of Proverbs as well as the rest of Scripture. Because the idea there is, yes, pray, cry out for it, but also seek it, dig for it as for treasure. And where do we dig? We dig in the treasure book, right? The Word of God. What is that, Nor?
Scripture.
Yeah. So be careful with that. You know, sometimes when people, you know, we throw out James 1:5, you know, if anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, he will give it. And that's certainly true, but don't forget the other side of that coin. You know, when people may come to you for counsel and they say, you know, I have this issue or this problem, I don't know what to do, or I need God's wisdom or direction. And I've been praying about it. I've been praying, but, you know, then what I do is I ask, well, that's good. I say, that's good that you're praying for it. What have you been studying in the Bible to help you find out what to do? They'll look at me like, what? I thought I just need to pray. I said, well, no, you do need to pray, but you also need to seek. And then I'll take them to Proverbs 2 and I'll show them. Say, look, notice, if we need wisdom, we pray for it, we ask fervently, but we also search for it. We search for it in the word God has given. So, so keep that in mind. Okay, so that's really a overview introduction to wisdom literature, to Proverbs in particular, as well. So that's going to form a foundation for moving forward as you work on your Proverbs passage, which comes from yeah, Kazo.
Can we say that the two major themes in throughout Proverbs are wisdom and folly?
That's what's set out as sort of the two paths, or typically what's compared, you know, the path of the wise and the path of the fool. And then the naive is, oh, go ahead.
But maybe for wisdom, anything that goes with it, righteousness, discernment, all these things, maybe we can say that it really is built on the fear of God, and anything opposite to it is full. That's what the overview of maybe the theme for Proverbs.
Yeah, the theme for Proverbs is, I would say, let's see, I mentioned earlier, basically, I wrote it out here. Where did I put it?
Fear of the Lord.
Relationship.
Yeah. But where did I? Oh, yeah. To provide the wisdom of God to life so the hearers would know how God would want them to live in light of fearing him. So it's instructions for how to live life the way God would want based upon a relationship with him. Something like that.
Okay, thank you, Pastor Tim.
Okay. Now the fool, you know, is the one who rejects God's ways because he rejects God. Or folly, you know, the way of folly. So yeah, as you're studying your passage, you know, keep those principles in mind. Just this idea of the principle that the Proverbs are promises, or not promises, or not guarantees, but guides. And then also too, that the fear of the Lord is the foundation, the beginning of wisdom, the foundation to it, that you can't disconnect a relationship with God from walking in the ways of God. Right? That just, you're not wise if you don't, if you're not truly wise if you don't have a relationship with God. Okay, it's not about your behavior. It's about the basis, the motivation for that behavior. The behavior is the fruit of what's in your heart, right? So, Proverbs offers this path to wisdom, and that this is the way God would have us live. And if you really can see, it's a test. It's like Psalm chapter 1, right? The first Psalm, it talks about the way of the righteous versus the way of the wicked, right? The Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. And it's really a contrast. The righteous, right? Notice it says, blessed is a man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the path of sinners, or sit in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. Why? Because he has an affectionate reverence for the Lord. So he wants to know what God has said. His delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. Why? Because he's seeking wisdom, because he has an affectionate reverence for a fear of the Lord. And then Psalm 1 contrasts but he says the way of the wicked will perish, right? The wicked are not so. They are like the chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore, the wicked will not stand in the day of judgment. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. So again, speaking there, the Lord knows the way of the righteous. That's speaking of relationship again. Okay? All right. Couple of things, class notes here before we end our time. One, I have confirmed the dates as far as my trip. So we are confirmed for, and I hope you guys can make the June 20 to 25. Is it? Yeah. June 20 to 25 for module 3, sorry. Okay. And this module will be a little different than our other two. There will be some instruction. We'll review some key principles from module 3, but also I want to use it as a time for, one, we have some assignments to catch up from module 2. I went through I've graded everything you guys have turned in, except a couple sermons, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So some of you still have a few assignments from module 2, and then all of you still have assignments for module 3. Some of you have done a lot of them, some not as many. So what I want to focus on these next few months is especially getting both module 2 assignments, module 3 assignments done, and we'll use our time together in June to help get those finished. So if you need help on some of them, we'll have some time we'll just make as a workshop to do that. Also want to make sure everyone's preached their narrative sermons. And then some of you are ready to preach or have preached your psalm sermons, so you can we can do that at that time. But I want to make sure that basically everybody's done module 1 assignments, module 2 assignments, and including the sermons. And so what I'm going to do in the next few weeks is I'll send you what I have from you, or what I don't have from you. All right. So you can look, because maybe you did finish it, but you didn't upload it, or maybe maybe you uploaded it, but there was some problem. And this is something I noticed with the sermons, is some of the sermons, the Canvas has erased my evaluations on the module 2 sermons. I can't find them. I don't know what happened. And Selma was asking about his last week. And so I was looking, and I don't know what Canvas did. So I'm not sure. I'll have to figure out how we can fix that, because I know some of you, I graded some of your sermons that you guys did, and I know you did them. But I don't know what happened. I input the grades along. You probably even got an email back, right? Those of you that I did that for. So if you can find that email, send it to me, and I'll just credit you with the message. So we'll figure that out. We'll get it fixed. But I'm just letting you know, in case you get an email that says I don't have your narrative sermon, don't go crazy. Just say, well, I did finish it. Well, maybe you did do it and you turned it in, and I may have graded it even, but it is, I don't know what happened with Canvas. It's the first time this has happened. So I'm going to look and see if it got put in one of my other classes or something like that. But I'm just letting you know right now. So don't be concerned or frustrated at all. I'm just letting you know so that when I send you, your status, your assignment status, that that you can just let me know I did do the sermon and turned it in and got a grade, or maybe you did the sermon and turned it in and I didn't evaluate it. So we'll sort all of that out. But my goal is for by June to have everybody finished preaching their module 1 and 2 sermons and finished with module 1, 2, and 3 assignments. And then if you are able to preach your Psalm or Proverbs sermon, that would be the time you can do that as well. And then we get caught up, then module 4, my plan is to come maybe in October and start us on module 4, and we can get back on track. Okay. So that's my plan, Lord willing, to move forward and get us caught up. And by the way, at module 3, that's when I want to make sure as well that the payments for module 3, that we get all of that sorted out too, the finances part of it. Okay. But again, we can discuss more of that later. I'm just giving you an idea of what's to be prepared for in June. But that's still what, April, May, June. That's still 3 months away. So if you can just start, keep plugging away on the assignments, I think we can get caught up. So in the next couple of weeks, I'll try to send you a message, personal message, just telling you what I have received or what I have in Canvas. And you can go to Canvas as well and look if you want to see what you've turned in. Remember, there's 2 Canvas accounts now because we switched over. There's the old Canvas, which is the canvas.instructure.com. And then there's the new Canvas account for module 3, which is tmai.instructure.com. So that may be a little confusing, but we're trying to switch everything over. TMAI has purchased like a much better Canvas package with other tools and resources. So that's why they've switched over. We were using the free Canvas package before, but now we're using the one under TMAI, and that's much better in the long run. So all of the grades and everything is there for the records. So, all right, but the main thing I want to communicate with you is set June 20th to 25th on your calendars. We'll get more details about where we'll gather, but set those on your calendar, and also be on the lookout for a message from me regarding your assignment status. And thirdly, just work on the next assignment for module 3 that you have to do. So keep working on those. Okay. Any general questions on that? My goal for this next trip in June is just to get us all up to where we need to be so that we can be ready for module 4 in October. And if that's the case, then basically by by September, October of next year, we'll be done. can have graduation. Okay. So we're not, just a little more than a year away. If we get caught up, we can, even with COVID and everything that's happened, we can still get this thing done and, get you, get the certificate program, everything completed and all that. Okay. All right. Because that's my desire, is just to come alongside, help us be able to, be excellent at studying the word, preaching the word in the pastoral ministry. By the way, module 6, the focus will be on pastoral ministry. So we'll just talk about those things as well, in terms of that'll be the emphasis. And that module 5, the emphasis will be preaching your prophetic passages, and also doing a little more advanced exegetical stuff. So, and then module 4 will be the introduction of the prophetic genre and preaching your Psalm and Proverbs passages, if you haven't done them by module 3. Okay. Everyone's happy and excited. I can see the joy on your faces.
Yes. Praise God.
Praise God. All right. Well, again, man, just very encouraged by your perseverance, and look forward to a few months from now when we can gather together. But in the meantime, just like Solomon said, to be diligent to seek wisdom, we need to be diligent to complete our assignments. All right.
Thank you, Pastor Tim, for all your effort. Thank you so much.
So 2 more months, Pastor Tim. It's very close.
Yeah.
It's near.
It's near, just like the second coming. If you need any help or have any questions, please message me, and I'll be able to respond to that. All right. So if you have any personal questions you want to discuss with me in private, then just message me and let me know. Okay. All right. Virgilio, can you close us in prayer?